The online far-right message board 8chan has suffered sporadic outages after its cybersecurity provider cut off support in the wake of the El Paso shootings. The El Paso gunman is the third suspected far-right shooter this year to have used the site to post a manifesto ahead of the killings. But analysts say the closure of the site would have only minimal impact on the underlying problem of the rise of far-right extremism. Dr. Oboler is a senior lecturer in the La Trobe Law School and CEO of the Online Hate Prevention Institute. He joins me now from Melbourne. Dr. Oboler, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the question posed in the wake of the El Paso attack is, has the US neglected the fight against white extremism? Has it? And are we neglecting it here in Australia?
Look, there have been efforts to try and deal with this problem, but something like 8chan, it's a known problem. Back in April, after the attack which we saw at Paso at the synagogue, we published at the Online Hate Prevention Institute a recommendation that the US really needs to look at whether 8chan itself is counting as terrorist infrastructure, and 8chan needed to either come forward and say they will work fully with authorities to deal with those that are not only committing the attacks, but those that are encouraging and supporting them. Either that or the US needed to step in and actually push for it to be treated as a terrorist site and dealt with accordingly. It's running out of the Philippines at the moment. The Philippines does work with the US on counter-terrorism work. The question is, what are they going to do about it? Because putting pressure on companies like Facebook, Twitter, etc., doesn't do anything about 8chan. This is a company that's deliberately been trying to create a total free speech zone where this type of activity can and does occur.
What is the agenda of these far-right groups, and is their ideology somewhat mainstream now?
Look, it's still not a mainstream ideology, but it's also not small. 8chan and the alt-right in general have allowed these views to become much more publicly acceptable. The political climate in the US, various statements by Donald Trump refusing to actually confront it head on. You know, these sorts of messages are creating an acceptability where people that otherwise might have kept their views to themselves are starting to speak, to organise, to coordinate with others, starting to encourage others. And those that are a little bit more active, some of them go off the deep end and are actually committing attacks.
Yeah, so, I mean, are there any sense of the numbers here in Australia who just share the ideology?
We don't know exact numbers, but Australia does usually rank amongst the top few countries where these ideologies are spread. I mean, obviously, we've got Christchurch as a real example of an Australian who's been involved and carried out an attack. But every time there is discussions, there are data about the number of people involved, Australia is greatly overrepresented.
Yeah, well, the man accused of that Christchurch attack, Brenton Tarrant, he wasn't on the radar. Most, you would say, obviously don't take action. So how do authorities predict this and predict it accurately?
Look, the people we're talking about here are not the traditional sort of structured terrorists. We're talking about online groups where the action that the person takes is usually the first serious terrorist or criminal action that person is engaging in. So, in fact, Paso, it was the second incident. The person first went and committed an arson attack, and when there was no response, they went and actually gunned down people. So we need to have a response, but it's not the same sort of threat as we see with Al-Qaeda or as we've seen with Islamic State, where it's more coordinated, where there is a structure. These are a loose affiliation of people. Many of them in 8chan, it's an anonymous forum. It may be the same people coming each time, but you don't know who you're talking to. So the result is it's very hard to track these people. It would be possible if a company like 8chan worked with the police, was willing to share that data, but the entire infrastructure has been set up to make that next to impossible.
Right, so I mean, if someone was on a site like 8chan and a crime was committed that maybe didn't appear to be a hate crime, if they could tie it back and see that person's activity then that could maybe help them be on the radar. For example, an arson attack, you wouldn't immediately think it was a hate crime, but it could be tied that way. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the problem is on 8chan, firstly, the posters are posting anonymously. At the back end, yes, they can work out what the IP address is, but the other side of it is that the messages vanish very quickly. It's not like Facebook where the messages stay up and are stored. 8chan, 4chan and the like are designed so that messages appear for a brief period of time and then they fall off the other end and vanish. Which means it's, even if the message itself is copied, all of the metadata that says where it came from, who was behind it, etc., which could be accessed if police were to approach the company and the company was to play ball, by the time police get round to it, that data doesn't exist anymore.
Now, tighter gun control in America is obviously something that a lot of people are wishing for and, hang tight on that, I would say. But shutting down websites, for example, it doesn't stop, obviously, this ideology. What are the practical measures that they can take in the US and here in Australia?
Look, the first thing is that taking away the primary sites where people are gathering does stop it spreading. It doesn't get rid of it. They will move to other places, but it will have an impact. It will reduce the frequency of what we're seeing. So that sort of work does need to take place. The problem is the internet is a global infrastructure. The content isn't necessarily based in the countries where the attacks are occurring, and the people running the infrastructure can jump from one platform to another, from one country to another. So really it does take global action, and it takes a willingness to seriously engage and to stop it, not just when it gets to a physical terrorist attack, but when it gets to the environments that are spreading the sort of hate speech which leads to these attacks. And 4chan, 8chan, the channel poll within these forums, that's well known to have been doing this for decades.
Dr. Andre Oboler, Senior Lecturer in the La Trobe Law School and CEO of the Online Hate Prevention Institute. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.